in a excuse me. The notice for this, that's okay. The notice for this got picked up in a North Country Trail Facebook group. So that invited a bunch of folks in, and a few have said they're interested in the topic, but hadn't specifically heard of the Finger Lakes Trail. I'll go back and describe my hike here in 7 phases as we go through it. And I've got a little something to talk about on each one of them. There was the starting phase, the blistering phase. We got through that quickly. The strolling phase, when everything was moving along just fine. There was a fatiguing phase somewhere right around the middle that happened to line right up with the fall weekend for the Finger Lakes Trail Conference. Then I had another cruising phase where everything was going well. Hit a grimacing phase at about mile 450. And then the summiting phase sort of brought it home through the Catskill Park. Each one of these was accompanied by a day off, by a 0 day. I'll introduce myself a little bit. This was me on day 4. Thanks, Aaron, for that picture. In day 47, one of my mantras when I'm working professionally or doing other things is that I take my breaks moving forward. I may be moving slowly, but still moving forward. There's 4 goals that I use for planning outings. I do a lot of outings with scouts and other groups. Everybody should get a wow out of their trip. The challenge should be a Goldilocks challenge, not too hard, not too easy. It ought to be just right. We should avoid illness and injury. And when you're all done with this, you want to come back for more. And there's my Boy Scout motto there of be prepared. What I thought was really neat was how many thru hikers had signed in our trail registers along the way. Some of these, and I confess sometimes rather than hiking down the trail, I stop and I flip through a trail register a little bit and see who's there. I see Joan Young did a thru hike of the North Country Trail in 2022. I saw her signed in. Tom Gorman was ahead of me by a couple of weeks. I rooted for his hike pretty much from beginning to end. He didn't know that I was behind him. He couldn't know that I was signing in the trail registers after him, but I saw his hike all the way from the west to the east. This guy, Bernie, was doing a thru hike of the North Country Trail. He was doing a flip-flop hike. So he was finishing up the Vermont to Michigan piece. I'd seen him in some social media, and then by the time I crossed his path, we unfortunately missed each other by a couple of hours in Hornell. He was westbound and I was eastbound. But I thought it was neat to see how many people were describing a thru hike, which begs the question, what is a thru hike? So I looked around. The Appalachian Trail Conservancy says, well, to them, a thru hike is hiking their whole trail in 12 months or less, whenever that would be. Far Out, the app used to be known as Gut Hook. They describe it as hiking a long distance trail end to end within one hiking season. So they leave it open for what's a long distance trail and what's a season. Very popular blog. Many of you probably follow it. The Trek is very popular with long distance trail hikers. They say that thru hiking is an experiential accomplishment. It's a personal accomplishment. And from that end, they say the only question that matters is, what do I consider a thru hike? And did I do that? I wasn't going for a fastest known time. So for me, my thru hike was find the western terminus there at the state line. I was the second hiker, I think, to come to that sign. Mark Velades is on the call today. I'm not sure the bolts were even cool by the time I got there. He had just installed a new sign on the western terminus that day. So he'd be number 1 hiking by it, and I think I'd be number 2. And then 47 days later, this here, I believe, is the summit in the eastern terminus of Slide Mountain in the Catskills. So for me, a thru hike was leaving home on day 1, starting that hike, moving forward on the trail until I got to the other end, in this case, 47 days later on Slide Mountain. I've got to say that Annette made this trek possible. This is my wife, Annette, that you see there. That's her backpack you see in the upper left. My trip was pretty simple. I bought 34 maps from the Finger Lakes Trail Conference, and I picked up map number 1, and I just followed it until I got to map number 2. And my navigation was really quite straightforward. I knew what to do next. This was Annette's navigation. She started at her home in Wayne County outside of Rochester. And we went down to the Allegheny State Park. She backpacked in, and we spent a night there at this first lean-to. Then she went home. And then, boy, on day 8 or 9, she came out again. I took a 0-day, no mile day. We took a day off at an Airbnb near Ellicottville, and she went home. And then we couple of other visits as we worked our way through. A couple of these visits ran over to her parents' home in Oneonta, which was very convenient. One of these involved a side trip to my son's college Frisbee team. I didn't have to do anything but sit in an easy chair and enjoy a day off. So thank you to Annette, made this trek possible. This was her journey, and I don't know how many miles it is that she put together on that. So, but she was there for the first night in the woods, and she was there for the last nights in the woods and the summit of Slide Mountain. A day.
Tim, this is
yes.
Tim. This is Peggy. Before we get too far, you were talking about getting to the terminus and starting.
Yep.
And being a new terminus, how did you find the Western Terminus, and how did you
Sure.
and
Sure.
then how do you wind up getting somebody at the end? How does that work?
Gotcha. So for the Western Terminus, I looked at that. I talked to a few folks. Mark Velades is on the call. By the way, he's got the fastest known time on the trail. So I was barely into my hike by the time he'd finished his through hike there 2 years ago, I think. So I got some guidance from him. I got some guidance from the FLT maps. My choice there was actually to be driven 1 mile into Pennsylvania. There's a trailhead there on the North Country Trail that's a mile south of the border. And then I hiked that 1 mile up, and that's what brought me to that the Western Terminus sign. And then it was a mile or two later, I went ahead and I met Annette on the trail, and we went into a lean-to. So to make sure that I hit that Western Terminus, I actually started a mile into Pennsylvania and then hiked in, and that allowed me to step right on the beginning of the trail where it starts at the state line. And then the Eastern Terminus, I'm going to jump to the Western Terminus here a little bit. Forgive me while I scroll until I find. I kind of anticipated that story there, Peg. I might be making folks dizzy, but bear with me. Just got an hourglass here. You guys are all getting a preview of what else I've prepped here. Sorry. Hang on, I'm going to get there another way. There we go. What I learned on the Eastern Terminus, I used our map. I got some guidance there. Oops, sorry, guys. I'm must be hitting something. I'm sorry. Hang on just a second. I'm going to relax. I think I'm just hitting my mouse clicks before the machine can catch up. There we go. So what I found a little bit of a challenge finding the Eastern Terminus, the New York State DEC regulations there preclude us from putting up a sign like we have in the West. So I learned my way through it. It's the summit of Slide Mountain. There's a really good view, and then there is, I think, the highest point. I worked on looking to see what is the elevation. I think this is a footer of an old fire tower. Here I am standing on a tree next to it. I wanted to get that photo op there when I'm at the other end. And then there's a really nice rock. It's all got all kinds of carvings in it, initials and dates from decades and decades ago, and a really nice view there. And I never made it all the way to the Burroughs plaque further to the east. But as I worked my way across, I didn't want to stop hiking until I knew I was done. And so I discerned that this spot right here was the highest point on on Slide Mountain, and I declared myself done when I could stand there and get that photo taken. Thanks, Peg. So let me go there and say I'm kind of playing off of questions that folks have asked. I put together a close to ultralight pack. Um, my base weight was 22 pounds. Base weight excludes food. Food weighed about 2 pounds a day. Water weighs 2.2 pounds per liter, and trekking poles are in my hands, and the clothing that I wear. So all of that is excluded. But everything else came in at about 22 pounds. Here's my pack here sitting while I took a break. I hiked in Trail Runners. The Ultra Lone Peak is a pretty effective shoe, good grip. So I hike in a trail running shoe. I can do that because the pack itself is relatively light. I won't go through everything over here, but you could see I prepared prepared as close as I could get to a light sleep system. Everything I needed to sleep from my actually backpack and sleep system came in just under 10 pounds. 4 pounds of clothes, 3 pounds of gear. My kitchen was really an ultralight kitchen. I'll talk about that in a second. But I essentially put together as low a weight as I thought I could to keep myself going. As I was moving along, I added some foot cream that I picked up at a store. I added more pairs of briefs and socks because I got tired of laundering them and trying to dry them on the back of my pack. I added a scrap of leather as a pot holder because I burned my fingers. By late September, I added one more base layer. I had a puffer jacket, but I added a base layer shirt. I added a separate small foam pad because although my inflatable foam pad is supposed to have a good R value when the air got cold down to 40 or so, I needed a little bit of more foam between me and my pad. And then I put in an additional battery pack just to recharge headlamps and phone. I dropped my Kindle. I dropped the pack cover. I went to a lower weight T-shirt. I did that after the first week and a half. And then my Lone Peak shoes, they blew out. So I went back to an older pair in order to keep going. Some folks have asked, what does my trail meal look like? Trail meal looked pretty much the same every day. Everything here I could get from a grocery store or Walmart. Annette had in the back of our van stocked up essentially bins of groceries. So it's all pretty much simple, readily available. Breakfast every day was instant oatmeal, a couple granola bars and coffee. It was the same breakfast every day. Lunch was tortillas, peanut butter. Skippy makes a really nice squeezable pouch, dried cranberries, and a sausage snack. Dinner was where a little variety came in, some North sides and mashed potatoes. It takes what I think 2 cups of water to make the North sides. It takes 2 cups of water to make the mashed potatoes. So by the time you eat that dinner, you've had the equivalent of 4 cups of hydration. And then snacks, the Gatorade has a really good protein bar, a Gorp mix, Cajun mix, some corn nuts, lots of Mike and Ike's candies, probably a few more granola bars, a really simple kitchen setup. Some folks that truly go ultralight only carry one pot. I carry 2 pots so that I could cook each one of my entrees one at a time. And I wouldn't have to eat one, cook one, and so forth. So so that was enough calories to kind of get through the day and keep rolling. What I did come to appreciate though was town food. So when I came through a town and got someplace and I could eat some food that didn't come out of my pack, I actually met some of the marshals for the Seneca Nation when I went through Salamanca, and I asked them where's a good place for lunch. They said the local diner had closed, but walk into their administrative building the cafeteria is in the lobby. They should give you no problem. So I just walked into their employee cafeteria, and I had what was on order. When I got to Ellicottville, I run into a mountain biker that said, "Boy, if you're going through Ellicottville, you got to go to Madigan's." So there's a nice Irish pub there. I got myself a Guinness and a burger and a beer and a battery charge. In Swain, there's an inn there that happened to be wing night. One day I walked past a local food stand and I bought myself a pie and sat down in the sunshine and had myself a pie. It wasn't what was on the menu, but it was a treat to be able to get was a treat to be able to get some food that didn't come out of my pack. So I'll share with you some numbers here of the trip. Oh, I apologize. I'm scrolling a little bit. 30% of my time I was in my tent. There's a tent sitting there at a campsite. Somebody here probably would recognize that sign in that campsite, but 30% of the time I was in a tent. 39% of the time I was in a lean-to. 34% of the time I took 0 days. Every week or so I took 1 day off. That 1 day off would get me a night on either side of that day off. And then a few times I stayed someplace else. When I was in my second phase, I hiked through Swain Mountain. You could book a room at their ski lodge. So I booked a room and got a shower there. And then this long run here, what I call my fatiguing stage, that's when I was going through and around Watkins Glen in Ithaca. I stayed at the home of my friends Keith and Diane. They literally live steps off the trail. So they put me up for a night. And then I went to the FLT fall weekend and I just broke down. I booked a hotel room when I went there. So I didn't use my tent, but I booked a hotel room when I went back to Watkins Glen. You can see a little pattern emerged here. When I got started, that tent was going up every night. I'd hike by the shelters or I'd put my tent up next to the shelter. It was a little bit buggy and warm early on. And then, boy, by the time I got to the latter end, you can see a lot of blue here. I ended up preferring and using shelters. I tracked my miles. I couldn't help it. I'm kind of a numbers guy. I'm a kind of a stat wonk by trade here. So the first part of my trip, this first starting phase, I kept my miles relatively in check here. My son Nathan is on this call listening in. 2 years ago, he did the Appalachian Trail. He's 2.5 decades or more younger than me. But he shared with me a little bit of wisdom there. He said, "Dad, don't get started. Don't go out too fast, too hard in your first week. Make sure you get everything sort of dialed in." So I kept my miles relatively short. I think I did a 17 on the third day, but then in here I dropped down a little bit. My fifth day here was what I'll call a near O. 0 is a day when you do no miles. A near O is when you only do a few miles. I actually adjusted the start of my trip. I had planned on starting about that day. And then I learned that there was a trail work team going into the Little Rock City. So I backed up the start of my trip to a Sunday so I could get there by a Thursday. So I was able to stay at a lean-to probably a half mile from there, participate in a work day with a great crew that was building punch-ins through some mud spots there. And then the end of that day, I had 3 miles to go to get to the old CCC campground. So that's what I kind of called a Nero day. And you can see in the first trip, I kept the miles relatively short. I didn't get my first 20-mile day until almost 4 weeks in. I think that was the day going from Watkins Glen up and going east from Watkins Glen over towards Ithaca. The mileage that I tracked on here, I only counted what I'll call map miles. So anytime there was a closure or a walk around, temporary closure for logging, I didn't really count those as miles. I was tracking the nominal miles against the map as we described it. And then as I got rolling here, I was able to consistently put miles up that were kind of in the high teens. Um, and then the couple of partial days over here, this was the day that I started. This was the day that I finished. Um, Annette and I had camped just down the road from Slide Mountain. So she had driven in, met me in the woods a couple days before up at Balsam. I think it was Balsam Mountain Lean To. So she came out, spent the last couple days with us. Mike Cunningham, I see your question there. So my pickup there at the end, she'd come out a few days early. We climbed the mountain together and then departed from there. So I'll share one more number with you here, and I'll do a little bit of a tease on this one. I had a song going through my head. Anybody remember a hit from? Oops, I'm just going to slow down a bit. I'm having a little. I think I'm hitting buttons before the screen moves. Anybody remember? I think it was Nina was the name of a German pop band. Around 1984, they had a song, 99 Red Balloons Go By. If you remember that song, put it in your head and then play it back a few more times. I got up to 12. I got up to 12 Mylar balloons. I don't know what it is. I was hiking on the Finger Lakes Trail. I found three of them before I left Allegheny State Park. Somebody had a grad party. And then as I progressed my way across the state, um, it seemed when I look here and I look there, I came up with a dozen Mylar balloons. So congratulations, graduate. Happy birthday. Hello, baby. A few more happy birthdays. These Mylar balloons don't break down, but I couldn't help but I couldn't help but sing that hit song in my head every time I came across another Mylar balloon. So I picked them up, I dried them off, I stuck them in my pack. Makes me think twice about buying a Mylar balloon because it'll end up in the air, up in the woods someplace. Um, Besides hiking the trail, I do some search and rescue work off trail, and I do some map and compass work. And it seems I'll be in the middle of the woods someplace, no trail anywhere around, and I'll come across somebody's Mylar balloon. Um, I just see a question here in the chat. How did I keep track of miles and start and end points? I did a number of things here. When I started, I just had a stack of probably 10 maps in my pocket or 10 maps in my pack. I had all 34 ready of them printed. Um, Pardon me, I'm going to move this forward another slot. There we go. So initially, I figured I'd just read a few days ahead on the map. Let me figure out where I am today. Where do I think I'm going to stop next? I'd scan ahead in the maps looking for shelters or designated campsites. I was prepared, if need be, in open state forest to sit down, but my preference would be to find an established campsite. Um, so initially, I sort of read ahead in the map a few days, kind of planned about where I was going to go. Figured I might be able to plan my food replenishments on the fly. It helped that very early on I went through Salamanca and Ellicottville in the first few days. But then I shifted over and I could do a little bit of editing. I'd come online with my phone maybe once a day, twice a day. And I started making notes in a Google document that I could save and store. Um, Annette was following that. I'd shared it with family, and I had a couple of friends that were thinking they'd come out and join me on the trail. So I began to start making notes in a Google Doc about where I would go. That was better than trying to text anybody because I could make the note and leave it, and somebody could come back and pick it up later. So you can see over here on the side, I started making notes of about where am I going to go, how far is it going to go. This is the early part of September. So I used the paper maps. The descriptions on the back of the paper maps were very helpful. I always carried the day's paper map in my pocket. I used Avenza on my smartphone, um, just as a convenient place to go. If I ever just want to get another view of where things are, scan it, look it back. I would go do that. I would do that sometimes if I wasn't smart enough to put the second paper map I need for the day. If I hadn't gotten out of my pack, it was easy enough to just look it up. And then as I got into September over here, these are Annette's notes over here on the right. She started looking ahead through a copy of the maps, thinking, hey, about where am I going to be, and when does she have an off day, and when can we meet up for next 0 day? So you can see here she started sketching out some mileage. By the time I got well into September, I was pretty much following this as, yep, that works. I can do those miles. I see where I'm going. Um, Annette really did the work of looking ahead to say, when do you want to push and do, say, a 22-mile day? Because if you don't, your next day is going to be short, or your next day is going to be extraordinarily long. So that plan really helped. I was able to find, for the most part, I could go shelter to shelter in that sort of 15 to 20 something mile days. That gave me enough of a plan to move forward on. And I was pretty much able to pick up a plan for 5 or 7 days ahead, and I didn't have to move off of that very often. So health here was all in all pretty good. My third outing goal is to avoid illness and injury. Um, I came up with trench foot. Apparently, that's not a very complex situation. It just means there's so much water in your skin that your feet have swelled up very, very large, and that is had nothing to do. It had to do with nothing more than just um, gentle rain every day. Every evening it rained. Over in the west, I think there's probably a little precipitation off of Lake Erie. It seemed to rain for 10 or 15 minutes every evening after dinner and then stop. Um, but being under the cover of trees or being in meadows, I just went for about 3 or 4 or 5 days where every day there was enough rain that the grass was wet, the ground was wet, my feet swelled up. I'm not apt to get blisters. I rarely get blisters when I hike, when I run. But I developed a really big blister on the bottom of one foot, so much so that it ended up sort of straining my Achilles, tightening up my left calf muscle. It was as if I was walking in a downhill ski boot, where you just can't flex because I'm not using that part of the toe. Um, Fortunately, that was as I was heading into a night off the trail at Swain. So I had off trail accommodations. I had a room with a shower. I was able to sort of dress and treat the blister. And then I thought for a minute, should I take a day off and let it heal? Instead I opted to just dress it and move forward as best I could. I think I was really fortunate. The trail eastbound out of Swain is an old railroad grade. So it's about 3 miles of gentle, dry, well drained railroad grade, which is just what I needed to get going. Second issue I got was bee stings. It was August. There were spots where they were coming out of the ground and I got stung. I got stung on a forearm, I think, passing a dead tree near Hammondsport. It was just a dead, rotted tree. I got too close to it. I opened a trail register, and a nest had built up in there, and 2 or 3 of them stung me right on the neck and the chest before I had time to even react. I'm not allergic to bees, not that I know of, but I am aware that there is some risk here that if you've never been allergic to bee stings, it could happen. It can happen as we age. That repeat stings could bring a risk and could bring sensitivity. So I was aware of that and began to get really careful once I've had 5 or 6 stings in about a week or so. And then once I got out of that week of maybe late August, early September, I didn't have any more problems with bee stings. I think maybe the weather was starting to cool there. Um, I did get a muscle tear. It was probably the easiest, most straightforward piece of trail to walk on. It was a meadow west of Bainbridge, and the trail just nicely goes through there. I think the remnants of Tropical Storm Ophelia might be the name had been going through, so it was about 2 days of just steady drizzle. And I just slipped in a mud patch, slipped enough in that mud patch that my left toes went downhill a little bit. I think my weight went backwards, and as near as I can tell, I tore some muscle tissue in my left shin. Um, Way more than sort of shin splints. It didn't drop me to the ground, but it was enough to say something's up here. Um, I kind of finished that afternoon. There's a long downhill into Bainbridge. I found, I think the back door bar was open. So I went in for a burger and a beer and a battery charge. And I rested there for a little bit. Um, and then I found when I left Bainbridge, it was an uphill climb. There's a steep climb up a power line. I was fine on the uphill climb. My son Nate came out. He slack packed me. Slack packing is when somebody will pick up your heavy pack and let you do a few miles with a day pack. I managed to do the 5 miles downhill into Masonville. And then it was at that point that I really knew something was wrong here. Walking downhill when your toes are below your heel really strained that muscle tear. Um, I thought about stopping that evening and then because I knew I had the next day off, but I didn't want to start the day after and do the road walk. So I worked my way through that road walk, got to Bainbridge, took a day off. So I rest, I put ice on it, compression, elevation, kind of treated that tear for a day or so. Thought about adding some more rest days in, taking a second rest day. So far, I hadn't done any more than one day off. My 0 days were just a single zero. I hadn't put them together. Um, but I decided to go ahead and wrap it and give it a try. Nate drove me back to Masonville. I got on the trail there. I was really fortunate there. That was an uphill hike, and uphill did not bother that muscle. I think because the toes were lifted, it took the pressure off. So it started that day with a couple of miles of uphill and was able to work my way through that, um, wrapping it every day while I hiked, unwrapping it at night and elevating it. I still had right almost 150 miles after that, but I was able to slow down my pace and keep going. It meant that I was starting some mornings in the dark and ending most days in the dark by the time you get to the um, is it the fall equinox there in September? It's starting to get later and later, less and less daylight. So most of my nights I finished with a headlamp on to navigate into wherever my campsite was. And then I'll have what I'll call a dehydration event. I can tie it back to a couple of mistakes. I'd gotten back on the trail near Downsville, um, hiked up to the Campbell Mountain lean-to up in the hills above Downsville. Um, Spent the night there. I'd gotten in very late that night in the dark, um, partly because I stopped at a bar to watch the Bills game. Go Bills! But that at my slow pace, doing the uphill out of there, took me a while to get up onto that ridge, up into the highlands to that lean-to. Um, the next morning, I got up, had breakfast. I knew there was a stream not too far from there, so I didn't really extra hydrate at the lean-to. I hit that stream and I filled probably 2 1 liter bottles, but I didn't guzzle a liter of water. And sometimes I'll do that before a long hike or before a long trail run. So I did a couple of things on that morning that I was never thirsty, but I really didn't manage hydration. The second mistake I made was not carefully reading the topography and the maps ahead that day. I had a long day planned, um, and the second part of that day was going to be up in some up going over through some mountains. Um, and I ended up pulling up at about 5 o'clock. Trying to remember the name of that campsite there. Um, it might be Mary something Road, but I pulled up to a campsite that the advice on the map was there's no water there, and that advice was spot on. Um, but I got there at about 5 o'clock. I was feeling dehydrated. I really hadn't had. I'd come close to draining my 2 liters of water. I had probably a half a liter left. It was a hot day, probably getting into the high 70s. I'd been up and over ridge lines. Really, no water refill since 9 a.m. So I got to that spot and I said, I'm not in terrible trouble, but my plan can't continue. What I'd planned to do was 7 more miles, likely in the dark, in order to get to the next campsite that has a pond. I was feeling kind of tired. I was feeling kind of slow with a muscle tear. And I thought about not quite sure what the tenting arrangements will be up on the mountains as I go across. No chance of getting water when I get up into the mountains. Um, so even though it was about 5 o'clock, which is a relatively early stop, um, I decided to just stop there and set my tent up. And I've got a half a liter of water. I'm going to somehow milk this half a liter of water overnight. When I hit the trail in the morning, maybe I can find some puddles. Maybe I can find some drips coming off of rocks. And then I got lucky. It literally was probably 5:45, maybe not even 6 o'clock. I was in my tent ready to go to sleep. There was a car parked at a trailhead parking spot. A bow hunter had been out for the day. He came back, uh, and so I walked over to him, and he was getting ready to drive away. Asked him if he had any water, and sure enough, he had 20 ounces of seltzer, and he had a bag of apples. So he gave me 4 apples and 20 ounces of seltzer. Went back to my tent, drank the rest of my water, kept that 20-ounce bottle, and was able to go on the next day. Um, I would say by lunchtime the next day, I'd done those 7 miles over the mountain and had water. But it would have been a tough night going through if I'd pushed all the way through. I rehydrated there at what I thought rehydrated. I drank a lot of water at that pond. What then I learned was it took me 2 full days, I think, to recover. There were some various other lingering symptoms of having been dehydrated. And I think it took me 2 full days before I was able to kind of go forward and say, okay, that was a mistake letting myself get that dried out. Um, and I'm a little bit off on the next 2 days. By the third day after that, I'd pretty much recovered. So there were some lessons learned in that. I mean, I had every clue I needed to better manage my hydration. The campsite's up the trail. The map says there's no water there. The topography shows that there's no streams to cross. Um, and the lean-to I was at had a stream. I crossed a stream, so I had all the clues. I just didn't really check into them until it was too late. I think I probably could have worked my way through if I had to. If the guy hadn't given me the water and the apples, I think I still could have made it that next day. There were a few spots. I carry a very small cup that you could slide in and catch drips of water coming out of rocks. I did find about 2 miles before the pond I arrived at, I did pull out about 2 or 3, maybe 4 ounces of water from a puddle and ran that through my Sawyer filter. So I was able to get about 4 ounces of water on the way. Um, but that was a sort of a mistaken planning, mistaken judgment that I think I probably could have avoided there. Um, I had a few, what I'd call a few dicey times on the trail. Let me bring that up next here. Just a few. Coming out of Allegheny State Park, I didn't know this happened when Annette went through it. Fortunately, it wasn't a problem. But when she left on day two, she went back to an access point that was on a service road at within Allegheny State Park. Um, we had made sure when she dropped me off in Pennsylvania that she could drive around and drop her car there and then hike in to meet me. Everything was fine on day one. We spent the night in the woods. On day two, she went back to her car and started to drive out, and the gate had been closed. So we're on the inside of the gate, and the gate had been closed. Oddly enough, too, that particular spot has no cell service. Um, we're fortunate there that when she got out and checked the gate, it was not locked, it was simply closed. But that would have been a little bit of a difficult time to have your car on the inside of a gate and to have the gate locked and closed behind you. We don't know how it came to be that the gate closed overnight, um, but it was. And on day one, we'd actually pre-driven in there to make sure that the gate was open before we started. I had an odd car drive up at the CCC camp there between, I think just south of Ellicottville. There was another couple there that had a van camper that they were in another campsite, but this car drove in and sat and idled there for 30 minutes. Their headlights were shining straight at my tent. I could creep out and look. They didn't get out of their car. They didn't go visit the shelter, but it was just odd to sort of have a car drive into a campsite and just hang out there. After a half hour, they just drove away. But it was one of those where you'd say, well, I'm not going to go back to sleep until I know what's going on there. Also in the West, I came across a pair of aggressive dogs. They ran up to me at a kiosk, um, but then ran off kind of scared. And then maybe 150 meters later, I'm walking down the road, walking down the left side of the road, and the dogs are there at a spot and they're barking and they're aggressive, and I can't understand it. They didn't come and approach me like they did the first time, but they were aggressive. They were in that spot, and I'm trying to figure out what do I do? How do I want to play this? They almost seemed like they were protective of something or somebody. So I was preparing myself to call the 911 center and say, I'm stuck on this road. There's a couple of dogs. Their behavior is really odd. Um, I don't think I can walk by them, but I also think it's worth questioning what's there. I was beginning to go over across the road and try to flag down a car on the other side. I thought if I flagged down a car, um, somebody might walk, let me walk by their car to get past the dogs. So I turned and began looking for traffic. Wasn't sure I was going to do that. I think if I had seen a volunteer firefighter's blue light, I probably would have flagged one down. And then just like that, the dogs were gone. They took off. They abandoned whatever spot that they seemed to be protecting. There didn't seem to be anybody or anything over there. Um, but I was able to continue and keep going. Boy, I got a lightning strike before I got to South Bradford. It was a warm day. There had been a little bit of rain, and then just out of nowhere, one lightning strike just hit, maybe a quarter mile away. I'm trying to think of the name of the little reservoir in there, but it was one strike. It came and went and was gone. A little while later, I'm approaching South Bradford, which is a town way up on an exposed ridge. I see a thunderstorm is coming. Um, do I stop and wait and hunker down, or do I keep going? And I decided to keep going. Managed to kind of race up and over the top of it. I had in my mind that there was a post office there. I had in my mind that Scott Geiger had taken a picture of a flag at a post office in South Bradford that I'd seen circulated somewhere on the internet with a photo credit to. So I figured, well, I'll keep going, and if I get in trouble, I'll go to the post office. It's not a post office. It's a flagpole at a street corner. Um, and by that point, the thunder was coming in. I wasn't comfortable going into the homes that were there. So it was a little dicey to kind of get over the top of that and then get down into the valley. Um, Fortunately, that the trail right there dips down into the valley very quickly. When the heaviest thunderstorm had hit, I was down in a gully, reasonably well protected from, well, I thought from lightning. A couple of heavy overnight rainstorms. I'm not quite sure where I was that just kind of drenched everything. I stayed safe. I stayed dry in my tent, but all my gear was wet. You can see here in the upper left is I set up what looks like a yard sale, but after a day or two and a really heavy night of rain, the sun came out. It was a gorgeous day. I hit a mowed field. Everything was wet. Everything was heavy. And I probably spent 45 minutes there flipping every piece of clothing and tent. Every piece of gear I had, I flipped it over one way or another. And then the last dicey time was on second to the last day. I knew this was coming. I'd seen that there was a trail report that Tom Gorman, again, he was a week or so ahead of me at this point on his hike. But the highway department um, took a bridge out and replaced a bridge. So that was kind of a long road walk to then after cold weather for a few weeks. Those days were probably close to 80 degrees. And what would have been a 2 mile road walk, 2 miles of the road walk there, approaching Slide Mountain, turned into a 5.5 mile detour. So I dropped 2 flat miles and picked up 5.5 miles that went 1,000 feet up, maybe 300 feet down, 300 feet back up, and then 1,000 feet down. So it was a town road, and there's no other way to get through it than that. I'd stopped, I'd looked at that, I was tired. I thought maybe I could go down and ford the stream. Um, there was another trail that goes through a fire tower near there. We looked to see, boy, maybe I'll just take the trail up and around, up and down that fire tower. And really, after giving it some consideration, it was nope. It's 5.5 miles to tack on. It's a climb up and down. Was able to get food and water down in Claryville, and just stretched that on and made it a really really long day. But other than that, those were really the kind of the diciest spots of the trip. There we go. Here was that eastern terminus. I was looking for like, where is the place to go for a photo? It looks to me like the two best places to go for photos there on Slide Mountain are on either side of the terminus. This is a gorgeous, just fabulous view. The timing was, this is October 5. The timing for fall foliage for us in the Catskills was fantastic. So we had one view looking out there. I think the best photo op is this spot over here. Um, and then, as near as I can tell, I went and I stood on this block right here and stood on a tree, fallen tree you could see right next to it, and said, "I think that's the highest point along." At which point I'm gonna say, "Hey, my through hike is done because I'm at the summit." Um, and then if you're keeping score here at home, which um, I'll put up the final scoreboard. It took me 1 hour less than 46 days. So it was 47 days on the calendar, 45 days, 23 hours. Not that I'm challenging any fastest known time. So for me, it was about 1,079 hours. And I was asleep for about a third of those. And you reflect a little bit about how does this trail come about. There's 20,000 plus volunteer hours um, every year that go into this trail. Volunteers in all kinds of roles. So my takeaway message from the opportunity to go do this through hike here is thank you to the stewards, sponsors, the maintainers, the volunteers, the landowners, the donors, the supporters. Your effort, dedication, generosity makes possible the special treasure that is our Finger Lakes Trail. So, my friends, that's my through hike on the FLT. I'm delighted to share that with you all tonight. Um, I've
Let's see,
saved
one
some time
question
here for questions. Yes, help me with that if you
in
would,
the
Peg.
chat. The question is, what was your typical pace before your muscle tear? And were there a lot of breaks during each day hike?
Yeah, I mean, I was doing, probably, when I was moving, I was probably doing 2 miles an hour net of moving time and breaks. So I was probably doing 2 miles an hour in the beginning. Um, by the way, doing 2 miles at the beginning gave me time to get into camp in the evening and relax, read a little bit on my Kindle. I dropped my Kindle partway through because I wasn't reading it anymore. And then towards the end, I probably dropped down to about a mile and a half an hour. Um, and I just didn't feel like I could or should push it any further than that. I got to where I'm comfortable in the woods by myself in the dark. So early on, I was hustling to try to make sure I get into camp before dark. And then in the latter part of the hike, I just kind of slowed it down and said, um, if I get in after dark, I get in after dark. So,
And the next question is, would you through hike the FLT again, or did you acquire the itch to through hike another trail?
you know what? I absolutely would through hike the trail again. As I've gone through my pictures, I've looked at some spots. As I hear and read people, they're sharing on our social media about their hikes, I say, I know that spot. I remember that spot. There absolutely was a wow every day. And it could be the salamander you see there. It could be a nice farm that's in a valley. So I really enjoyed hiking this trail that is right here where we live. So I absolutely would do it again. I don't know when or if I will do it, but I would. What I would share with you is as I got back, I thanked Annette for enabling this trip and said, "Well, you get to pick the next hike." So we have the trail guide for Vermont's Long Trail, and we're putting together a 2024 plan that the two of us will go hike the Long Trail. That'll be the next itch.
What about doing the FLT through hike in a different season, like starting it completely different month to have a different experience for the seasons?
Yeah, oh, that might be neat. That it might be neat to do it when the days get longer and not shorter. So it might be interesting to do it then. I'm interested in the branch trails. I know Letchworth and Bristol very well, but I don't know the others. So I may go give a try to the branch trails. I'm thinking about putting together a scouting program to do a 50 miler on the Onondaga branch. So I think I want to spend some time there and see if I can learn. Is there a good spot there that's conducive to 10 miles at a time? 10 miles at a time on the Onondaga branch, perhaps stretching a little further and ending at Chittenango Falls Park. Um, so I think that might be another nice one to go do.
And good question. What about ticks? Did you treat your clothes, or did you encounter a lot of ticks?
I did not. I did not treat my clothes. And boy, I had a tick puller. I don't know that I got any ticks on this hike. Um, what I've noticed on other trips on the trail, when I'm most vulnerable is sort of the end of the hike when you're sitting by the side of the road waiting for your ride to come pick you up and you're in the tall grass. So sort of being stationary in grass is a risk. I did wear a pair of running gaiters, a very light gaiter over my running shoe that goes partway up, but that didn't go much further than my ankles. Um, so I was fortunate. I don't think I got any tick bites, but I also didn't use any chemicals to prevent it. So
Now, the way that you hiked it, was it because map one started at one? That's why you went the direction you went? Or do you recommend going east to west or west to east? Is there a preference in your mind?
Got it. Well, the preference in my mind was to go west to east. And there's actually a reason for that. When I talked to Mark V about his east to west run, he chose that route because he was more familiar with the west, and he'd be finishing up sort of in his home territory. Um, I wasn't familiar with the Catskills when we really got to them, but coming through the Hammondsport, Ithaca, um, uh, uh, Bainbridge, Downsville, that area. I've got family that way. So I chose to go that way because I knew as I got to the later part of my hike, um, I'd be closer to sort of home territory there. Uh, the hints on the back of the maps are excellent, and they read best when you're going from west to east. You know, a couple of them that would tell you how to navigate a farmer's field and lot next to the barn. Couple of the notes there, they read that way. Um, and then, of course, I see Mark is on the call here, so I'll tease him. It's easier if you start in the east because it's all downhill. Um, it's all downhill. So starting in the west, it's a net uphill. I think plus 3,000 feet. And actually, truth be told, I don't know the calculation for how many net miles of elevation gain there is from end to end, but it's the fact that one of them starts down low and one of them ends on a mountain. That couple thousand feet, I'm sure, is insignificant in the total elevation from end to end.
Yeah, it's probably the same both directions, somebody said, but oh, Mark said that. And I'm sure somebody here can figure out mathematically, the elevation gains going in each direction.
Yep,
Um,
yep,
and
yep.
was
Hey,
45 days your goal? Was that your
yeah,
original goal, or
yeah. Hey, Mark, thanks for that question. I was thinking it would take about 7 weeks. So I was thinking it would take me about 7 weeks. I better plan for 8. I'd wrapped up some work with a client in June, and I didn't go line up something next. So I kind of slotted in and said I think I need to allow an 8 week window, but I think it'll take probably 7 weeks to do it. If I had to come off for an illness or an injury and needed a few days, I needed to have that sort of that extra little bit there. By the way, I didn't start until August 20th because my best hiking gear was with my boys on the Colorado Trail. So they went out and did the Colorado Trail. That's just a little 500-mile trail, by the way. It's not as significant as the Finger Lakes Trail. I'll remind them of that occasionally. So I
how,
needed to find a 7 or 8 week window, and I was able to figured I could fit that in late August. And if I had to go another week into October, it would be getting colder, but we could still do it. So
now you mentioned your boys in hiking. Are they both Finger Lake Trail end to enders yet?
no, no, actually, my 3 sons went out to the Colorado Trail. All 3 of them are Adirondack 46ers. One of them has through hiked the Appalachian Trail, and then collectively, they've come out and done some small things on the Finger Lakes Trail, but they haven't gone big onto the Finger Lakes Trail.
Well, maybe you could do that with your sons one day. You'll do the whole
Yeah,
hike.
absolutely, absolutely. To get out and hike and to spend time on trail with family is just really cool. Finding the 8 weeks and figuring out a way to do that is a big deal. Um, by the way, I do see a couple of folks, the notes I put on very early on of, hey, I might want to go through hike the Finger Lakes Trail someday. Um, I think as a group here, we ought to take a vote. Anybody here that says I might want to and I plan to try one, um, give a thumbs up or put in the chat, go take a hike. Those folks look like they're just that much closer to committing themselves to do it. So there's a whole lot of things, right? There's a whole lot of things you got to take care of, right? A whole lot of things you got to go do. But boy, to be able to carve out 4 weeks and take a through hike somewhere, or in my case, 7 weeks to go do it is just a special time. So
Right. And like somebody pointed out, the different trails through hiking, it's different experiences. And what's nice about what you've done here is you've opened up their eyes to things they may not know about the Finger Lakes trails and what to expect, and especially the back of the maps, how well
yep, yep.
worded the back of the maps are, um, to accommodate people. Not all trails have that. So I think it's wonderful. Um, if people still have questions, that's great. You could also unmute yourself if you want to ask a question. But I wanted to tell people, if you're not already a member of the Finger Lakes Trails, I highly encourage you to join. And one of the perks, I consider it a perk, is you get the quarterly magazine, the FLT News, and the latest issue has Tim's end-to-end story in it, and he details a lot in that article that he wrote, which most of the end-to-enders, I think, write some sort of article. It could be one paragraph or 3 pages. Um, but that helps people that are going to be going out there and doing end-to-ends or even just section hiking to know what they're going to encounter. So that in itself is a wonderful reason to join the FLT. Plus, as a member, you get discount on your maps that you buy. So that's another good reason to join the FLT. Um, Somebody said, based on their through hike at the FLT, the elevation gain is 54,850 feet. But I think Mark said something was higher. Elevation gain was 90,000. So I don't know
Yeah,
what the
it all comes in. It all, I think it all comes into how precise your measurement system is, how much smoothing you put on your GPS data, how carefully you manage to the maps. I'm curious though, to be honest. I'm also an Adirondack 46er, but it would be really cool to conclude that the elevation gain of the Finger Lakes Trail end to end is that how does that compare to the elevation gain of the Adirondack High Peaks? So
Well, hopefully somebody could research that and get back to us on it. That'd be
yeah, I'm
interesting.
curious. Yep. Yeah, I see a
The
note here. Somebody in the chat says it's 54,000 feet.
Yeah,
Um, yep.
the FLT Connect for next month should be on um February 15th. We haven't finalized the topic yet, but keep your eyes open to your email or on the Facebook page for what the topic is. And this presentation was recorded. So if a friend of yours or family is saying, I'm thinking about doing end to end, steer them towards the FLT YouTube channel and they could listen to Tim's presentation because I think it really helps. And I think a really important question just came in, Tim. I think it's super important, asking about satellite communicator or cell phone cell service and how you coordinated your supplies.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I don't carry a satellite communicator. I've thought about it, but I haven't gone to do that yet. So I've carried a cell phone and I've carried a battery pack for that cell phone. And then the other piece that I do, which is as important as having that cell phone, is keeping that cell phone in airplane mode and power saver when you're not actively transmitting. So what I would do is I'd have my Google location share. Annette would have that. A few other family and friends would have it. And periodically during the day, I'd be on a ridge. I believe I would get reception. I'd take my phone out of airplane mode and out of power saving mode. That would sync back up to Google Maps, my last known location. And even if family and friends don't happen to be online, it would just store to my Google Maps where I was. And when I was there. Then I'd go back into airplane mode, back into power saving mode. I was using my phone, by the way, to take pictures, to take notes. I took notes and logged several things as I was going using my phone to do that rather than a notepad. So my phone battery lasted very, very well. Late in the trip, I put a second battery in just because I was using a little bit more, sort of transmitting a little bit more. I've thought about carrying a satellite communicator. I need help beacon, and maybe I'll do that at some point, but haven't quite done that yet.
How bad was the cell service, or how good was the cell service?
Well, you know what? I mean, I had cell service every single day, but you can almost predict what you're going to have at nighttime for cell service. If your lean-to is by a stream that's in a valley in a gorge, chances of cell service there is really low. And we'll often cite a lean-to or a campsite. You're sort of chasing that water source. If the lean-to is up high on a ridge, I'd have cell service right there where I am. Um, so there are a few spots. What I learned to do early on was if I thought I was going to if I thought my overnight site was not going to have service, I'm getting to about 4 o'clock or so, I would send Annette a text and say, "Hey, all's well. I'm headed to this place." Um, and then if I get there and I've got cell service, I would drop a text and say, "Hey, here's where I am for the night." Um, but I dropped that early message because it might be, and it happened a few times. I get to my campsite, go to check in, and there's no service.
So Mark Soden found 145,000 feet total ascent for the ADK 46ers. So that's definitely more
Yep. Yep.
than the FLT. Um,
Yeah.
so that,
Yep. Yep.
and he posted a couple links in the chat if you wanted to look at the chat.
Oh, I'm going to check.
Mark
Yeah,
also
I'll check.
posted too. So,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah. I'll check that. So
well,
thank you.
it's after 8 o'clock. Do we have any more questions or comments on Tim's presentation? I really want to thank everybody who came um, and participated. Attending the FLT Connects is wonderful, and having them recorded is an extra bonus. I appreciate Tim taking a lot of time putting his presentation together, sharing the information. It benefits a lot of people that are going to be out there hiking. So I appreciate it. If anybody has any topics they'd like to hear on one of these programs, please let us know. We're always looking for um, new presenters. And Tim, I really appreciate you doing this tonight.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here, Peg. Thanks for that. If I could, my last word would be if you're thinking about this hike, you're thinking about another hike, there's a whole bunch of faces that are on this call tonight that would help you. If you got questions, if you're hesitant about this, or you think you got to solve something before you do your hike, um, I'd be happy to hear from you. And I know there's a bunch of people on this call here that would would give you some tips, give you some support, give you some encouragement, and maybe even give you some help when you're in the field on the trail.
Absolutely. All right, so we're going to wrap it up for tonight. Um, Hopefully, we'll be out snowshoeing soon. Getting enough snow. We got more.